Hey, welcome. I'm Kath Nolan, once high-performing perfectionist good girl turned goddess of balance, kicking even bigger goals. This is the podcast where we make balance doable for busy, overstretched working women, embracing your voice, honoring your feminine power, and protecting your energy. This allows you to truly step into greatness for the sake of all you hold dear. This is balance, and I am so glad you are here claiming balance for yourself. Pretend that I know absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
I have all the usual, like I've got all the female organs, but mine did not come with a manual, no rule book.
Yeah.
And you're talking about this stuff in business. So to me, that's mind blowing because when I started my career, we almost had to kind of pretend that we were the same as men. So we'd be taken seriously. So we were not talking about like cycles and career. That is not something that ever would have been anywhere near a conversation of topic at work. Okay, so menstrual cycles, why are they relevant to work and our careers?
Good question. And I often say that we are the same person, whether we're at home, we're with friends,
Mm,
out doing whatever we do, and at work as well. And
yeah.
we take our body with us everywhere we go. It's the one constant that we've got. And so naturally for women, we go through a lifetime of cycles and phases
Mm,
which do deeply impact. And when I use the word impact, I don't want people to instantly go to the negative impact, but rather it
mm,
has an impact, but which can be positive or negative.
okay.
But it plays out in every facet of our life and in everything that we do.
Mm, sure. So working with your cycle, what does good look like?
Well, so we all cycle. So women, we all have our cycle. It's
Mm,
important to acknowledge that even though there's a lot of averages, so typically they talk about our cycle being 28 days, every
mm,
woman's cycle is unique to her. And it's really important to preface that there is no, I don't think, right or wrong. It's really what it is for that woman and what she
mm,
gets used to with her cycle.
yeah.
In terms of what that looks like, it's really around how can you be connected to your body and embrace the ebbs and flows of what you're experiencing. So, high energy, low energy, coming into those times where we're a little bit withdrawn or a little bit quiet, coming into our most creative phases, our high energy times where we're just raring to go. Our bodies always speak to us. And unfortunately, in our busy, busy existence these days, we very rarely take the time to stop and listen to what our body is telling us. And the beauty of the female physiology is that our body changes every single month, and we go through 4 very distinct phases every single month. And it's a gift for us to be able to connect to that and harness that to support ourselves in business, career, in life, and health.
Okay. That sounds amazing. I'm going to ask you about the four cycles and the four phases in a second, but um, you said, our body's always talking to us. Natalie Moore, my body is talking to me all the time. And often it's saying things like, you're really tired. And, oh my goodness, I've got some great ideas. And all of those, I mean, that's very familiar to me. But there is so much that's going on. I have never in my life, I'm 48, I have never in my life thought, oh my goodness, I wonder if that's my cycle talking.
Mm.
Usually it's like, oh, yeah, I'm exhausted because the kids are doing X, Y, Z, or because I'm managing two businesses in a household with three kids. And there is so much going on. I was talking with a friend a few days ago about grey area drinking. And, with there are so many different sources that voice can come from. How do you separate it out? So now I've got two questions for you. What are those four phases, and how do you separate and listen to that voice and know that it's related to your menstrual cycle and not just, the chaos of life?
Mm. Yeah, so I'm a yoga and meditation teacher and a big believer in that mind, body, gut, breath connection.
Yeah.
And when I talk about our body speaking to us, it really is about taking that time to ask yourself a very simple question, and what I often share with clients I work with is ask yourself, how am I feeling? And, see what comes up. So don't necessarily come straight to that first word that comes to mind, but rather take a moment to take a breath and feel in and just say, how am I feeling right now? And I can tell you that your body will listen to you and it will give you signs of what you are feeling. So I know for myself, when I have moments of fatigue, that, I'll stop and ask myself, how am I feeling? And I sometimes feel that fatigue deep within. And it tells me that you need to stop, you need to slow down and just, ease into this day. And that is the beauty of understanding our cycle. So for myself right now, I'm in my luteal phase, and I'll jump to each of the phases in a moment. But that luteal phase is the time just before my period or my menstruation phase. And so I'm in that phase of lower energy. My body is wanting to just slow down, and I'm listening to it. I can tell you, before I had this knowledge, that I wouldn't even have acknowledged any of that. But it's really through the power of knowing the cycle and the phases that you can start to feel and hear and listen. So I'll begin with the 4 phases. So as I said before, typically our cycle is 28 days is an average, but it might be 26, might be 24. It really depends, as I said before. And so we start with our menstrual phase. So day 1 of your bleed is your menstrual phase. And that lasts anywhere from 3 to 7 days. Again, very different for every single woman. And essentially the focus here is that we are in a phase of repairing. So think about, and we liken this to winter. So we overlap each of the phases to the seasons of the year. So our menstrual phase is our winter phase, very much a reflective phase. And our body is in that repair mode. So you can sort of see, when you think about winter, you think about we're wanting to really just hibernate. We're wanting to come into ourselves, eat delicious, nourishing foods. And that's our body's natural way of telling us that you're in this menstrual phase, and just to be with where you're at. Yeah. Then we come into our follicular phase, which we liken to spring. So again, think about how we are coming out of winter, we're coming out of our hibernation, and we are ready to take this higher energy dynamic phase to another level in terms of we've got a bit more energy. So this phase typically lasts anywhere from 7 to 10 days. And our energy levels are a little bit higher. We've got that sense of new beginnings, creativity, some positivity. And that is all likened to our energy, ramping up a little bit more. And then, of course, following spring, we come into our ovulation phase, which is our expressive phase. And it is the shortest of all the phases, so it can last anywhere from 3 to 4 days. And this is the phase where our energy levels are at our max. So we just feel ready to do everything and anything, and we're feeling really positive. We've got great connection to ourselves, great connection to others, heightened communication skills. And again, thinking about summer, that we just want to get out and do all the wonderful things that summer brings us in the beautiful warm weather. And then following our summer, our ovulation phase, we come to our luteal phase. And that is where we are starting to see a dip in our energy, as I just alluded to with myself, that our body is getting ready to come into our bleed. So our longest phase, so can be 10 to 14 days. And very much like autumn, this is the time where we're getting prepared to hibernate. I often find that sense of nesting a little bit. So if any of your listeners had children, you've got that sense of preparation. Our physical energy might decline a little bit. We might find our attention is a little bit off. And I will say that I've had that a bit this week, that I've come to sit down and do some work, and I'm sort of like, oh, I'm just not feeling it. So for me, I often then change and I'll do something else that doesn't really require me to give so much brain energy. I come into
Yeah.
more activities that are a little bit, I've still got to do, but yeah, not so taxing on the brain.
Mm,
So in a nutshell, that is the 4 phases of our cycle. And so you can see how we just ebb and flow across every single month. And
mm,
almost liken it to being 4 different women in every single month of every year, which is a positive. That almost each month or each new cycle we get to
mm.
reinvent ourselves, and we get to create new things based on what our body's experiencing.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating to hear it broken down so clearly. And for a woman who has never really, I mean, I've heard about cycles, and, you know, that sounds ridiculous. I'm 48. I've obviously been experiencing cycles for a very long time, but I've heard about this idea of, adjusting your behaviors and your activities to your cycles for some time, but understanding what the cycles are and how to do that, what it means. This is absolutely fascinating. I can see how relevant it is to careers. I love that question you asked, how am I feeling? I think it's the most nurturing question I've asked this week, that I've heard this week. And your yoga background, it's just so blatant. It's so clear that nurturingness and connectedness, making up words as we go. Yeah, that's really clear. That's so fascinating, Nat. Thank you for sharing that. What about when someone though doesn't have a cycle anymore?
Yeah, so if a woman is no longer menstruating, it
Mm,
likely means that she has come into menopause or
mm.
postmenopausal. What is really fascinating is that we can actually come into and follow the cycles of the moon. I will
Ah,
preface that I haven't got a huge background in this, but something I am very fascinated and interested in is because when you think many, many moons ago, long time ago,
yeah.
women did actually work in sync with the moons, and every woman menstruated at the same time. So things have evolved over
What? Tell me
many, many
more.
generations.
Yeah,
Well, I'm going back a very, very long, long time.
yeah,
But, back in the days where women were classed as witches once they reached menopause or once they reached the age of 40 or 50. And then when we come into menopause, we were witches burned at the stake.
yeah.
It's fascinating, the history of menopause, I will say. But we are very much connected to the moon and the cycles of the moon. And the moon
Yes.
every single month goes through its own distinct phases, that if you
Yes.
are no longer menstruating, that you could actually start to track your energy levels and
Mm,
days to the moon cycles. But in
mm,
saying that, one of the greatest gifts that we could give ourselves, again, is just allowing us that time to connect with ourselves around what
mm,
we are feeling. Because I
mm,
will say that even when we come in to post menopause,
mm.
um, menstrual or menopausal symptoms don't just simply stop there and then. We're
Yeah.
still experiencing changes in the body. We're still
Mm,
experiencing remnants of perimenopause and menopause symptoms, and even some new symptoms as well. So, really connecting to yourself and just, again, asking yourself that beautiful question, how am I feeling, is a great
mm,
way to just connect with, where am I at this month? What am I experiencing?
mm. I love that you've given more words to that though, because I mean, my cycle hasn't always been 28 days. It's usually been longer. So having some words to put to that. So beyond I mean, how are you feeling? As I said, the most nurturing question that I've heard this week. But to give some words to that for context around where am I feeling in relation to my cycle? Am I feeling a bit wintry today? Am I feeling a bit autumn? Oh, is spring coming? I think that's so, so valuable. So the question about what good looks like when someone is actually tapped into their cycle. You gave us an example there when you're talking about in your autumn phase, your brain is not quite as switched on as you need it to be. So you might just sort of be willing to switch tasks rather than beat yourself up about, my internal dialogue can often be, oh, I'm a bit lazy today, or I'm underperforming today. So you're just switching tasks. It's so sensible. So what does it look like when someone is using their cycle effectively? What does good look like?
Mm. Yeah, so it looks like, I mean, you could go right down to the granular level. And I know women who have done this specifically, that they map out every single work task, meeting, project work
Wow.
specifically to where they are in their cycle. And actually have known a few women who have shared that with their team and have
Yeah.
shared it with managers as well, to let them know this is where I'm going to be at this month.
Yeah.
So if I reflect on what I do from my personal experience, because again, I think women will use this very differently. For me, I'm very conscious around where I might do specific project work or creative work.
Yeah.
And also, we often say as well, being careful around what you say yes to in your menstrual phase. So, for example, or late luteal phase. So you might have friends say to you, shall we go out for dinner this week, etc. And you might be thinking, yeah, okay, sounds good. And you might just say yes, but you
Yeah.
actually might get to that phase
Uh-huh.
and realize that you're in your menstrual or luteal phase, and look at it and say, actually, you know what? I'm not going to be at my best connection, communication time. Perhaps I
Yeah.
won't say yes to that.
Yep.
So
Yep.
when we're at our highest energy, we are ready to go and we want to go and do everything. So you want to be
Yeah.
careful what you say yes to, and just see
Yeah.
where that fits in across your cycle as well. And then can I just say that one of the greatest gifts that cycle tracking gives us is
Mm.
permission to rest
Mm.
and permission to slow down. Like, as you
Yeah.
said with your internal dialogue, that we tend to berate ourselves or self-loathe that,
Yeah.
oh, you're lazy and you're useless, you can't do this. But actually, when we stop and reflect with where we're at in our cycle and what we're feeling, we actually
Mm.
acknowledge that, do you know what, this, my body is not equipped for this right now. As much as I want to keep pushing against the grain, I need to listen and I need to stop, and I need to give myself permission to have, you might add in some extra rest breaks. So I know for me, earlier in the week, I had some extra rest breaks. I just had times where I just
Mm.
sat down, or I just even laid down for 10 minutes. I just allowed myself
Mm.
that time to just be, because I find when I'm trying to push against it,
Mm.
I'm not getting anything done, and I'm not being productive, and I'm not delivering my best work either. And the other thing I love to think about, and I share this with people I work with too, is how is it serving you? You know, how is what you're
Mm.
doing right now, is it serving you as a person, your health, your
Mm.
well-being? Is it serving you in terms of how you want to show up with the people you work with, or with your family and your friends? Again, that's a
Mm.
really great question to ask yourself. Is it, you know, how is this serving me? Because I think, you know, every day we wake up, and as business owners, particularly, we want to do the best work and create the impact or the mission that we've got. And
Mm.
so if we're not serving ourselves, our health and our well-being, we're not going to be able to serve the impact or the people that we want to work with.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Natalie, I love that the example that you used around, pushing back on other people and other tasks. I love that the example that you used was one that was social and not, what was going through my head before you used that example, which was, I'm sorry, my narcissist boss, I can't have this conversation with you today. Just wait till I'm ovulating, and then I'll be in my best form, and then we can have the conversation, and I'll feel safe, and as though I'm in my best space to communicate effectively
Yeah.
here. Um,
Yeah.
I can see a whole lot of interesting conversations coming after people have heard you talk about this. Nat, will you tell me a bit about your work? Tell me about your work in this space.
Yes. So my business partner Lisa and I have been doing this work specifically since 2020. Actually, we were both
Mm.
working in our own respective women's health coaching businesses, and it was in 2020 that we formed Own Your Health Collective. And the only silver lining for us with the lockdowns and everything we went on went through in Melbourne was us being able to come together, and through our personal experiences as well around menstrual cycles and
Mm.
menopause, and actually realize that if we're struggling to get the information for
Yeah,
ourselves and we've got the health background,
yeah,
imagine the women who don't have that and what they might
yeah.
be struggling with. And so we have been on this exciting road a roller coaster, I will say, for the
Yeah.
last 4 years of educating women around their menstrual cycles, as we've spoken about. But then, of course, menopause organically kept coming up. And the more that we spoke to women and have studied and learnt that, there's so much fear, there's so much stigma, there's a lot of shame with our cycles and with our phases, and it's impacting women in terms of how they want to show up in the world, living their best life and doing the work that they want to do. So we do menopause and menstrual cycle education for women, men, workplaces, community groups, as well as then offering the lifestyle health support as well, and helping women to, again, come back into their body and use the things that are at their disposal. So their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health, and how to really harness that for the life phase that they're in.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I noticed that you're doing a face-to-face workshop in Melbourne very soon. Another time that I was wishing that I was in Melbourne. I lived in Melbourne for a few years, but I live in Sydney. Do you do them in Sydney at all, public workshops?
We haven't yet. And I
Okay.
think a lot of it is because there's been a bit of, emotional baggage since COVID years. And I feel
Yes.
like this year is the first year that we've started to see more and more face-to-face events. So
Yes.
watch this space. We would absolutely love to go on a
Yay!
bit of a road trip and bring this education to many across the country.
Fantastic. Please let me know when you do. Please let me know when you do. I'll spread the word as much as I can. Nat, what are the myths around this stuff? What are the myths around cycles that you've heard of that that you're surprised by?
Yeah, the biggest one is really maybe not so much a myth, but just the fear. It's
Yeah.
actually mind-blowing just how much fear there is associated with women's cycles
Tell
and
me.
phases in particular. And I think a lot of it, where that comes from, is the patriarchy,
Yeah.
this fear of aging, getting old.
Yeah.
We ask women in all of our workshops, this is a menopause workshop, what comes to mind when you hear the word menopause? And,
Mm,
90% will say getting old, aging,
mm,
indisposable,
mm.
non-existent anymore, not relevant. So it's quite alarming, just the fear that's associated. And perhaps that leads into a bit of a myth that it's all negative. I think
Yeah.
what's really important is that we get to choose what our cycles, what our phases look like. And of course, I'm not taking away from women's experiences who have had troubling cycles with various health conditions associated,
Sure.
but it's also recognizing that knowledge is power. And so
Mm,
through knowledge, we get to decide how we embrace or use or what we think about our cycle. Um,
yeah.
I can tell you, since I've been cycle tracking the last few years, my menstrual phase really just comes and goes without a second thought.
Hmm.
Whereas previously I used to have PMS and cramping and lots of things, but since I've been so deeply connected to my body, it just comes and it goes, and I don't give it a
That's
second
amazing.
thought. Yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah.
How
So
extraordinary.
knowledge is power, and I think the real myth there is that it's all negative
Yeah.
and it's something to be shamed about. But there's a real power that comes in embracing our bodies.
Yeah. I feel as though the next three questions I was going to ask you are kind of just out in the ether. I can't think of them right now because I'm so wowed by that. That is just extraordinary. When before I had my first child, I was terrified of the pain. I don't have a great pain threshold. I do now, but I didn't then. Anyway, um, and I heard of this idea of hypnobirthing. And so I started to look into it. I tried to find a practitioner. They were all booked up. I was like, okay, I'm going to have to do some online research onto hypnobirthing. And the little bit that I was able to grasp and the information I was able to get a hold of, it phenomenally changed that whole experience for me to where it was just one of the most beautiful experiences of my life.
Mm.
This idea that the smallest part, to give you the smallest description, it was that rather than when a pain arrived, rather than going, oh my God, panic, there's a pain, what else is coming? It was actually just, there's a pain, the baby's coming. How exciting. And that shift for me changed my entire birthing experience phenomenally. Like I was so afraid of pain. But it was just the most joyous experience. And two other babies, same experience, joyous, joyous experiences. The birth was such a joyous thing. So when you say to me that your experience of PMS and cramp and everything has gone away because you're tuned into your body, that both shocks me, but also it rings so true. It just speaks to my heart because I can see the truth in it. My goodness me, what a wonderful, wonderful thing.
It is. And I think it just highlights the power of mindset, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm big proponent and supporter of mindset work, and coach and do a lot of mindset coaching. And there's real power when you can shift your perspective and really shift the narrative on where you are at or what you are experiencing. And again, not taken away from troubling experiences, but the power rests with us to say that, okay, I'm in this situation, or I'm having this experience. What can I learn from it? What can I do to embrace it? How do I make it a pleasant experience? How do I come into my body at this time as well? And that's all part of that growth mindset, isn't it? That it's looking at, what's the opportunity here? What's the potential with this, rather than it being a fixed mindset where, oh, it's always been what it's been and it'll be what it'll be and I can't change it or I can't shift it. It's really just flicking that switch internally.
Yeah, absolutely. Nat, you mentioned, I had a question about nutrition, and you mentioned that in the winter phase, I think it was, I had a little bit of a laugh while you were talking because you said we would crave nutritious foods. And I thought, well, nutritious is not necessarily the word that I'd use for the food that I'm craving, probably more in the autumn rather than the winter. But what role does nutrition play?
Yeah, look, nutrition really plays a huge role. And I will say that is my business partner's field as a nutritional food coach. But look, food is medicine for every facet of life. It supports our brain health, our gut health, heart health, our entire body. And you're so right. When we come into our menstrual phase, we do naturally have that craving for perhaps more carbohydrates. And, you know, that's all good. Again, that's our body. That's another way of listening to our body around what it needs, but it's also picking the right carbohydrates. So the carbohydrates that we can get from vegetables and different things that can support us. But
not vegetables that are really thinly sliced and dripping in oil. And
no, that's right. But you know what? Again, there's a place for different things too. And I think we're big believers that you also don't want to deprive yourself either. So, treats here and there are really important too, because again, it's about, most of the time we want to be eating the nutritious food that is supporting us, but we're all human and we all have our cravings as well. But look, nutrition does play a huge role. Again, winter, we might be more interested in what our body naturally wanting, warmer foods, like your stews or your casseroles, as opposed to when you're in your ovulation phase, like your summer, where we might be wanting our salads, and we might be wanting some more crisp vegetables and lighter meals, as opposed to those sort of heavier meals that our body is naturally craving during that winter phase.
Yeah, for sure. I'm thinking maybe that might have something to do with why there's things left in my fridge that maybe I've like gone shopping in a winter phase, but I'm getting around to eating in a summer phase. It isn't what I feel like anymore.
Yeah.
So interesting. And what about with people in the household with different cycles? Any advice on that?
Yeah,
navigating people with different cycles?
Yeah, so I'll have to say, watch this space. I've got my daughter's turning 10 tomorrow, actually, and so she's not menstruating yet, but we've definitely had been having lots of conversations, and I'm trying to educate her a little bit more at her level and at her age that she is. But again, information is power, and I think we've never really had conversations like this about our cycle. And the family unit is the perfect place to have those conversations and
True.
share again in where we're at in our
Mm.
cycle and help everybody understand where we might be. I mean, I know with close friends or even with my sister, sometimes we're pretty much in sync with our cycle.
Mm.
So there is still, again, the people that you sort of hang around with, there is that syncing, I
Mm.
feel, that naturally happens. But yeah, look, you know, talking about where you are, and again, I want to say that we don't have to go into the nitty gritty of everything, but at least having those conversations around what you're feeling and where
Mm.
perhaps what you might be experiencing within this phase of your cycle
Mm.
is really important to help relationships and help
It
that
is.
connection and that communication as well.
It is. Whether what you're feeling is related to your cycle or to the experience you've had at work or at school or whatever part of your life, I think it's so true. It's so true that how you're feeling is so true. Okay. I'm curious about workplace stuff.
Mm.
What are you finding? I mean, is this conversation that workplaces are more open to? Is it what what are you finding? What's the trend? What are you seeing?
Yes, look, we're definitely seeing more of a trend towards curiosity and interest
Yeah.
in bringing this education to the workplace. We often joke back in 2020 that we had virtual doors slammed in our face at the time saying, no, that is far too taboo. And that was the language that was being used, that
Yeah.
no, that is too taboo to bring into the workplace.
Yeah.
But really over the last 2 years, you know, we've seen a rise in the work that we're doing, and we've been working with some pretty big organizations across Australia to bring that education. And sometimes there is a bit of apprehension initially, which is understandable, because we often talk, we need to build the literacy around cycles and phases such as menopause. We just haven't had the language behind it or the knowledge.
Yeah.
And so we come in with an initial workshop around what it is and why we go through it. That is really important to understand why we go through it. And, you know, we'll find in the workshops, everyone will be a little bit quiet and not really sure. To the end of it, everybody is just wanting to have their say and have their conversation. And we've even had conversations with people after workshops who have said that, you know, there's one example in particular that we did a 3-part series with this organization, and she said after the first workshop there's a group of women that walked into the lift. She said we didn't even say anything to each other, but we just smiled and we just nodded and we just acknowledged that,
Wow.
I see you. And that is really, really profound
Wow.
impact that's happening within the workplace.
It really is.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add too that sometimes we hear mixed messages about men being present in such workshops,
Yeah.
but all of our experiences have been really positive when we have men come to these workshops, and they are sometimes the ones asking most of the questions
Yeah.
because they're curious. They've got someone in their life who is navigating cycles and phases, and they want to know how they can support them. So it's a conversation for everybody within the workplace.
Amazing. Amazing. So Nat, final word. I will drop, links to your Insta profile and LinkedIn in the show notes for this episode so people can find you. And I'm sure that people will come and find you. But what's your last piece of advice? What now? What's the one thing that someone could do today? What should they do more of from today?
Yeah, look, I think I often say start where you are. So let's whatever led you to this moment, let that go and just start where you are and take a moment of white space in your day, even if it's just a minute or two, to really just connect and ask yourself, how am I feeling? I know I've shared that, but that really is the starting point for you starting to be curious around what you're experiencing in your body, to then looking at, okay, this is what I need.
Amazing. Question of the day. How are you feeling? I believe that women do help other women. I hope that this episode has empowered you to question your willingness to go last. I hope that you will embrace balance. And I'm also hoping that you will help me to help other women to do the same. So how can you help? Show your support for the work. Subscribe and review the podcast here where you're listening. Follow the Goddess of Balance on Instagram to catch some cheeky behind the scenes and extras. Connect with me on LinkedIn and share the posts with your network. That would be sensational. If you have enjoyed this program, this episode, you will no doubt love my group coaching program. You got to find all the links to these in the little written blurb for this episode. Thank you, my friend, for normalizing balance with me. We are raising performance and reputations, wellness and equality. Together, we're creating positive change for working women, starting with you. Sincerely, I thank you for being part of the movement.